Earlier, I was joined by Liberal Senator for Victoria, James Paterson, and Labor MP for the Queensland seat of Griffith, Terri Butler, for tonight's late debate. Terri Butler, James Paterson, thanks very much for joining us on Lateline. James Paterson, exactly 1 month ago you tweeted, amazed at suggestions we should allow foreign nationals to serve in the Australian Parliament because 2 Green MPs can't manage basic administration. Things have moved on since then. Do you stand by the tweet?
They have, David, but 1 month later I still don't believe we should change the Constitution to allow foreign nationals to vote in the Australian Parliament. I believe it's a reasonable prohibition to ensure that only Australian citizens can be members of the Australian Parliament. The Greens MPs, though, I think are genuinely different cases from all of the other MPs from multiple parties who have now been referred to the High Court. Scott Ludlam and Larissa Waters were born overseas, knew they were born overseas, and when nominating for the Parliament, knowing it was a requirement to only be an Australian citizen, they didn't even bother to investigate their own citizenship status.
Well, I don't want to get too deep into the Greens. I want to ask you about your coalition partners, the Nationals, which appear to have a pretty serious problem with their vetting process. Are you annoyed at them, or others in your party annoyed at the Nationals for that?
Oh, I'm not annoyed at them, but all members of Parliament do have a responsibility to ensure that their nominations are valid. I think, though, in Fiona and Barnaby and Matt's cases, they are much less straightforward cases, and it's going to be very important to see how the High Court rules about whether or not they are eligible and were eligible to nominate. In their cases, they were all born in Australia and substantially to Australian parents, although Barnaby and Fiona had one parent who was born overseas.
Just back to your tweet. Amazed at suggestions we should allow foreign nationals to serve in the Australian Parliament. Barnaby Joyce has admitted he's a foreign national.
Yes, although at least in his case, he didn't know he was a foreign national, and I think it would have been very difficult for him to know that he was going to be a foreign national, and it will be up to the High Court to decide whether or not that was a precluding factor from him nominating. It will be a very important case because it will have ramifications potentially much more widely for other MPs.
Terri Butler, convince me after all that's happened in this past month that there should not be an audit into every single MP and senator as to their citizenship status.
Well, the quickest way to find out what's going on with all this, of course, is for the people who were citizens of other nations at the last election to stand aside, not exercise any votes, not participate in the Cabinet, have the High Court hear and determine it, and hopefully give us a more modern interpretation of what Section 44 means.
But how do we know? I mean, that's the point. Like, how do we know who is and who isn't? We had Barnaby Joyce assure us several times publicly, absolutely not a foreign national, absolutely only an Australian. Look what happened there.
And then he made inquiries and he found out that he was a New Zealand dual citizen and rightly admitted that he'd been one. Well, he didn't make the inquiries.
I mean, that was the point. These inquiries were made. They were sort of forced or foisted upon him. Do we have to do that as journalists for every single
David, my point is that he admitted it. He's admitted that he was a New Zealand dual citizen. And I think you'll find that every member in this place has probably been bombarded with questions from journalists, and there's been a lot of investigation happening in respect of who might be a dual citizen. What we have here, though, is a situation where the National Party's had dual citizens, the Greens have had dual citizens, Nick Xenophon's now considering a situation in respect of his own situation. You've had some other constitutional eligibility issues in relation to one nation. So you've got, I think, to realise that this is very much, it seems to be so far, a minor party issue. But we all want to get this sorted out. The simplest and quickest way is to try to get the High Court to give us a ruling on Section 44. And as I say, hopefully it'll be a more modern interpretation of what Section 44 actually means, and we can all move on with our lives. But until then, we don't know whether Barnaby Joyce has a right to sit in the Parliament. On current law, though, you'd have to say that the current law is that he didn't have the eligibility to be elected, and that we don't have a Deputy Prime Minister who's eligible to even be in the Parliament.
Why won't anyone in Labor hand over the primary source documentation that proves that they are not foreign nationals? That has not been forthcoming. You've just told us, well, that the vetting processes are all secure. How do we know?
Well, the vetting processes are extensive in Labor because we have the institutional support that you have
that's
from
the
Greens.
Without the documents, isn't it?
The Greens always call us an old party, David. There's some benefits with being an old party. We've been around for a very long time, more than 100 years. And when I ran for federal parliament, I've got to tell you, there was extensive processes to check on my eligibility, as there will have been for every other member of
Parliament. Why not
Parliament.
hand over the documentation?
As there will have been for every other member of Parliament. But David, every time a Labor MP has been questioned, they have been able to produce and have produced detailed timelines in relation to what they've done to renounce their citizenship. Now, this is not a situation where every member of the parliament is under a cloud, not even a long white cloud, but it certainly is a situation where there are some members of this parliament or purported members of this parliament who have admitted that they were dual citizens at the time of the election, which on current law rules them out of being eligible. That's what we've got to deal with here.
What about the politics of this week? This is what Julie Bishop told us in relation to New Zealand. Have a look.
Bill Shorten has serious questions to answer, and he needs to reveal his involvement in what is treacherous behaviour. New Zealand's facing an election. Should there be a change of government, I would find it very hard to build trust with those involved in allegations designed to undermine the Government of Australia.
James Paterson, NZ's under the bed, Kiwi conspiracies, whichever way you put it, this seemed absurd. Do you stand by those allegations that Julie Bishop made?
Well, I think it's plainly clear that what happened was inappropriate. The New Zealand opposition leader, Jacinta Ardern, gave a press conference where she said what her Member of Parliament did in her team was inappropriate, just as Penny Wong admitted that what her Chief of Staff did was inappropriate. It is not the usual way that we conduct politics in Australia, that we go to a foreign country and try and use their system for domestic political advantage. That was inappropriate.
Terri Butler?
Well, I'm surprised that James tried to defend Julie Bishop's comments then, because they were ridiculous. I mean, it was just laughable overreach, this treasonous, treacherous sort of national, international conspiracy that New Zealand's got going on, and threatening to not be able to work with New Zealand in the event that New Zealand Labor was elected. I mean, it was just ridiculous, and frankly the Foreign Minister had the response to that overreach that was deserved.
Well, just when we thought things couldn't get any more absurd, Pauline Hanson came into the Senate wearing a burqa. This was how George Brandis, the Attorney General, handled it.
That it is vital for their intelligence and law enforcement work that they work cooperatively with the Muslim community, and to ridicule that community, to drive it into a corner, to mock its religious garments is an appalling thing to do, and I would ask you to reflect on what you have done.
Order.
James Paterson, a standing ovation from the Greens and Labor. Why didn't you and your colleagues get to your feet?
Well, George Brandis represented our views on that matter very clearly, and we were strongly in support of him. I was applauding, as were many of my colleagues. Labor and the Greens didn't have an opportunity to signal their support for what he said, other than by doing what they did, so I understand why they did that, but it's not the usual practice to give standing ovations in the Parliament.
So it wasn't because you were still trying to treat one nation with kid gloves?
I don't think you could take that interpretation after seeing what George Brandis said.
Terri Butler, what was your reaction to Pauline Hanson's stunt?
Well, sadly, I think you could take the interpretation that there was some half-heartedness from the coalition from Senator Michaelia Cash's later press conference that day, when she just refused to condemn the stunt. And look, I think the broader question is not whether Liberals applaud Senator Brandis in the Parliament, but whether they're actually going to put their money where their mouth is and refuse to do preference deals or swap preferences with one nation. We've got an election coming up in my state, in Queensland. So far, the LNP there have refused to rule out preference exchanges with one nation. I'd like them to do so, because this is an organisation that is seemingly completely willing to trash the conventions and of the Parliament and to show it no respect.
Just very briefly, is there any need for a discussion about the burqa in this country, James Paterson?
I'm personally not a big fan of the burqa. I think it can be oppressive to women, and I think some women are forced to wear it, and that's problematic. But I am a fan of living in a free society, and part of living in a free society is that things which you may disapprove of, you don't seek to ban, because it is sometimes part of the belief system of others. So I'm not in support of banning the burqa at all.
Terri Butler?
Well, I just wish that Pauline Hanson would, you know, actually show some support for the issues that really affect people's lives. And what really affects people's lives right now is the fact that wages growth is really low, incomes have declined according to the most recent data. But where has she been on the penalty rates cuts? Where has she been in relation to actually standing up for working people? She hasn't done it. She doesn't care. She's too busy thinking up stunts to pull in the Parliament to be able to have time to actually stand up for the issues that people really care about.
Well, we're out of time. Terri Butler, James Paterson, a well-deserved rest this weekend. Thanks for joining us on Lateline.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for
Terri.
having us. Thank you.